afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second convening of our English Works Business Council. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to take a second to just rename yourself with your name and company name so everyone knows who you are, and feel free to say hello in the chat. And finally, I would just suggest that you keep your settings on speaker view. We decided that would be the best way for you to view your best experience today. Before I start, I want to just extend a special welcome to our Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development, Rosalind Acosta. We feel your love every time you're with us. It is a charm, so thank you for being here. My name is Claudia Green, and I'm the Executive Director of English for New Bostonians. For 20 years, ENB has worked to build a strong ESOL system in Boston and Massachusetts, and we offer a pathway to learning English and achieving success to immigrant workers, parents, and business owners. Through this pandemic, ENB has adapted everything we do, as I'm sure you all have, building investment, innovation, policy, and advocacy to help immigrants and their families survive, stay informed, and keep moving forward toward their goals through English classes. And now we are fully engaged in the work of immigrants' economic recovery. Currently, ENB is helping community-based classes across the city to sustain quality remote learning. We're launching customized English classes for worker-owned co-ops that will sustain very low-income communities, classes for restaurant workers, for grocery managers, and many others. And we continue to seek the collaboration of community and private sector partners to devise solutions. Thus, this forum and bringing you together here today. So now I want to pass it off to your official host for this afternoon's program, Mr. Michel Bomani. Michel is the Assistant Vice President and Assistant General Counsel at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. He's an active member of his community, and most importantly, he is the president of English for New Bostonians Board of Directors. Michel.
Thank you very much, Claudia, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank you all very much for tuning in today on this beautiful winter day that we're having. So today's event is brought to you through ENB's new English Works Business Council. It's a statewide business partnership program to convene leaders, facilitate collaboration, and share best practices to meet the needs of our immigrant workforce in Greater Boston. I would like to tell you a little bit more about the council. Why should you join the council? Well, immigrants make up 20% of the Massachusetts workforce and own 29% of Boston's Main Street businesses. ENB is a leader in working with immigrant communities to provide English language training and has a track record of helping business leaders create English for speakers of other language opportunities for their workers. Our goal is to provide you with access to a diverse and skilled workforce, offer visibility for your company as a good corporate citizen, offer special convening, trainings, and updates on the issues of workplace ESOL, and be a hub for council partners to draw upon ENB's knowledge and experience, assisting companies in designing and offering high-quality, cost-effective workplace English classes, as well as offer volunteer opportunities for your employees. So if your company relies on an immigrant workforce and wants access to cutting-edge best practices, if you prioritize training opportunities for immigrants through human resources, your DEI, or corporate social responsibility strategies, and if you recognize the critical role immigrants play in our communities and our economy, then you're in the right place. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge our founding council member, of whom we have some people here today. C&W Services, Stop and Compare Market, and Eastern Bank. Today we're gathered to talk about our topic, which is looking ahead, equity, opportunity, and the immigrant workforce. We hope to magnify the changes that are taking place in the labor market, and specifically the Massachusetts immigrant workforce, and determine how boosting English skills can help pave the way and the road to economic recovery. We'll start with a presentation on trends and data. Then we'll have a dialogue with public and private sector leaders, and then we'll address questions for you. By the end of this session, we're really hoping that you will join us in our English Works Business Council. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce a very distinguished cross-cutting panel. So with us today, we have Quincy Miller. Quincy is the president of Eastern Bank. Quincy helps lead Eastern's overall strategic direction, including not only its expanded banking footprint, but also its indelible marks doing and inspiring goods, and communities throughout the Commonwealth. Quincy has a powerful voice as a leader and advocate in the push for racial and economic justice in both the business and civic spheres. We also have Secretary Acosta with us today. Secretary Acosta is the Secretary of Labor and Workplace Development for the Commonwealth and a good friend to ENB. An immigrant herself, as you will hear, Secretary Acosta has been managing the state's unemployment relief programs, keeping us informed with labor market data, and ensuring training resources support the economic goals of Massachusetts workers and businesses. And we also have Chris Liu. Chris Liu is the sales manager for Little Leaf Farms and will represent the company today. Chris's father, Mr. Paul Sulu, founded and is president of Little Leaf Farms located out in Devons. Little Leaf Farm is the most technologically advanced lettuce growing greenhouse in the world. We love Little Leaf Farms because they grow not only great lettuce, but also great futures for their in-house English programs for their employees. And according to today's good news, it looks like consumers up and down the East Coast will join Little Leaf Farm lettuce very soon. So let us begin with a little presentation by Mr. Alvaro Lima. Mr. Alvaro is the director of the City of Boston's Planning and Development Agency Research Division, and he'll set the stage for us today. His work informs policy and decision-making by the mayor, the BPDA itself, the city's Economic and Workforce Development and Immigrant Advancement Department. Alvaro was one of the forward-thinking immigrant city leaders that helped form ENB 20 years ago. Can't believe it's been that long. So we are grateful for his vision then and now. Following the panel discussion, we'll turn to our audience, you, so you can share your questions, successes, and challenges when it comes to economic growth, equity, and English skills. In the meantime, I'll ask everyone to please keep their microphone on mute and drop their questions in the chat. So Alvaro, why don't you just get us started? How and why did the pandemic hit immigrants so hard, especially limited English speakers? And what is the data telling us about how the labor market and jobs are changing?
Let me try to share my screen. That's one of these most difficult operations on Zoom Live. Can you see my screen?
We can.
Okay. So I would like first good morning, everyone, and would like to begin by thanking Michelle and Claudia for the invitation, and it is an honor for me to be among such a distinguished group of panelists. During the last decades, Boston economic growth was supported by a population growth, a workforce growth, and productivity growing. Immigrants were a crucial part of all of these. The data that I'm going to show you, it's based sometimes in Boston, sometimes on the county, Suffolk County, because the data's not available at the city level. But it's important to know that the dynamics of Boston, it's very similar if you guard the proportions to many of other Massachusetts immigrant towns. And what's happening in Boston is also an example of what happened with immigrant towns all across the state. So if we look at the Boston population from 1980 to 2019, most of the growth of the population are from immigration and immigrants. That's a very important one because Boston, in 1980, Boston were losing population. The 1980s are not a great moment for the city, and most of the rebuild of the city came from immigrants coming to town. One of the importance of growth on population is that this can be translated on the growth of the labor force. And again, if you look at the labor force, most of the labor force for Boston, it has been immigrant growing labor force. So these two things can be also translated on productivity. So if you look at Suffolk County economic output, immigrants are responsible for around 23% of the county output. So it's in general for us, immigrants in general is very frustrating when that this kind of picture are not the first picture that people see on us, that we are a group of people that help the population to grow, the workforce to grow, and productivity in the city, which is benefit all our residents. And that will be true for Lawrence and many other cities, Shells and all cities that we know immigrants have been crucial, Framingham and to their rebuild from the 80s on. I don't know why this is not. Okay, so if we get some data of what is that impact, and we'll look at, we have around 210,000 immigrants in the count. They have around 3,000 business, and just their expenditure as consumer from their business income and from their income as workers, they create around 326,000 indirect and induced jobs. So this is calculated by their expenditure, how much job they are creating on other sectors. It's what folks in general economists call the multiplier effect. And if you look at the domestic product, is around $28 billion that they contribute, and they also contribute around 900 million in state and local tax. So this is the impact of this population in the country, and that gets magnified, for example, in cities like Chelsea and Lawrence and other immigrant communities that have an economic base that's much smaller than Boston's. So the COVID-19 crisis, both the public health crisis and the economic recession induced by COVID-19, exposed and worsened all the problems that immigrant communities were already living. We had, on the health side, you had pre-existing conditions that were there in the population, and they got into that crisis in a very fragile position, and also economically. Boston foreign-born population make up 27% of the city's population, and 57% of the low-income population. So you get on this crisis with the economic condition that are not that, that's very fragile. And if you get more data on poverty rate and children poverty, and so this picture becomes more and more complex. And if you look when they are in the crisis, you can see the industries that were in Boston. I think it's also right for most of the rest of the states. The industry that was hit really hard are industries that most of the workforce are immigrants. In Boston, 49% of accommodation, food services workers are immigrants, 43% of transportation, 41% of construction, and 40% of personal care workers. So these are, in Boston, the industries that got really have high levels of unemployment, and I still were kind of the first ones to suffer in the crisis, and probably will be, with the exception of construction, the ones that will come later online. And what all these industries have in common is the direct contact with person, or in the place of work, or with customers. And this is what the rules to control the health, the pandemic, was to reduce mobility and contact. And that's why these industries got hit. And this is a little bit different than other crises that we have, where economic problems happen in different sectors, not in a really focused sectors like that. During the COVID-19 crisis, immigrants faced a dire alternative. So, or you risk your life as an essential worker, or you risk your livelihood as non-essential workers. Most of the immigrants that were non-essential workers because they are in these industries and occupations, they couldn't work from home. So they were they were all outside. They become pizza deliverers and Uber, or they were unemployed. And multiple factors are at play on the vulnerability of immigrant workers before and aggravated by COVID. One is immigration status. There are weak social networks, low education attainment, language depth, labor market discrimination. So there are a series of factors that put immigrants in a weak position in the economy, and also when we enter the crisis. So I could focus on a series of these issues. I'm going to focus on two that I think are very important for ENB and for this audience. That is education and language acquisition. And I'm bringing the issue of education because they go together. Education and language. If you look at education attainment, in Suffolk County of workers age 25 and plus, you can see the difference between native born and foreign born. And we have that distribution. It's particularly, it's problematic now, and will be particularly, will increase as a problem as we go, and will make it. I'll try to make clear why. If you look at the low levels of education, no high school or some high school, these low skill jobs are increasingly precarious because they are being taken over by what people call the Uberization of work. So you have less and less a relationship of employment with the company. That means that you don't have healthcare, you don't have retirement account. So your situation as a employer is you don't have the benefits that an employer have. And if you add to that the question of immigration, so you are mainly working 2-3 jobs to make up means. If you look at the middle, kind of middle education from high school to a associate's degree that used to be and still is in great way where immigrants find their job, because that's the skills that are easier to acquire. You can go to a community college, you can go to a training. These jobs are at risk of automation or virtualization. One thing that COVID-19 did was to kind of accelerate automation and use of artificial intelligence that will probably occur in the next 5-7 years. It accelerates in 1 year. We can see that by having all of us here meeting on Zoom, people taking class in schools, the way you shop on Amazon, the way you the health and health and exercise and fitness with Peloton, and so there is a shift from on these industries that will require less and less folks on the in-store, for example, because you are going to do things online. So that is a shift that we don't know the magnitude, we know that some of these shifts will stick, and that will create a problem. And then on the upper level where you have a BA applies, that has been the move to that the Massachusetts economy have been on the last 20 years. We are becoming more and more an economy that's based on knowledge, and that requires more knowledge, more education, and will also accelerate as you look at the industries like biotech and all the life tech industries that will become more dominant in the state and in the city and will require more education. So if you look at the English language proficiency, the number of immigrants that have limited English proficiency is increasing in the city, and I think it will be true for in the city and the county, and it's true. I think it's true for the state. I mean, this is a product of increasing immigration in the city and the state. And with increased immigration, you have folks that most folks do not speak the language. And we have around 7,000 workers in South account that have limited English proficiency. So if we I mean, these look like hard problems to solve, and they are, and I don't want to minimize. But if we were to look at education and language, there is, I believe, there is a significant sector of new immigrants that have the education and the skills that they bring with them from their country and lack the language, and they need on the education side just to kind of learn some skills for a specific job, and with that the language. So I think that we will not be far-fetched to imagine, for example, on the education side, we have around 20,000 workers with less than high school education. If you were to imagine that we could move them one education up, so from less than high school to high school degrees, and this is all data from it. They are kind of median, so the wages are higher than the wages in the market. But in the first line, you have employment. So that is of all employment in Boston, what is the share of employment that requires a less than high school? What is the share that's 28%? What is the share that requires a high school degree, and so on? So we could imagine to move them one level, and we use a macroeconomic model that we have for the city and the state to calculate what's the impact in the economy when you increase the number of workers or their salary, or will bring a new company. And the increase that you will have will be around, on the annual wages, you will have a 3,200 increase on annual wages on average. The county income will increase up to 93 million. You will have the gross city product at 72 million, and the increase in spending creates 300 jobs, and so on. So you could calculate what is the impact in the economy by moving folks one level up on the education scale. You can do the same thing for language, and you will have, we run the numbers, that are the numbers. In red, you have some of research that has been done pretty recent. It's from 2003, and it was revised very recent, that shows that college graduates who improve their English from not well to very well see an average around 13% increase in their oral wage, and service workers observe an increase around 17%. So these are significant benefits for the person, for their family, but also for the economy as a whole. So I think that investments in education and language acquisition are crucial to reduce economic disparities and are crucial to contribute to an equitable recovery. Increased importance on education and language proficiency post-COVID, as I referred before, because of automation and virtualization, among other factors. I think there is an opportunity for us to reinvest and reimagine education and programs that integrate job retraining and language acquisition, and increasing education and English language skills will benefit to individual workers, to their families, employers, and will increase economic growth, which affect the prospect of all Americans, all Bostonians, all residents of the Commonwealth. So I don't think it's too much to think that some of the things is possible. And I think that the best example of that possibility is what English for New Bostonian have done, and other organizations through this last decade or so. I have at the end of the presentation that's going to be distributed to you a couple, 2 or 4 slides where I did a calculation of what are the jobs that are growing and what are the jobs that are shrinking by the level of English that's required. But it's too much data to go through, and I think I made that point in a simple slide. So thank you for the invitation, and I hope that will help in the discussion.
Thank you so much, Alvaro, and you're absolutely right. There's so much more information to unpack there. So thank you, and I love your ending of imagine what could happen and the wages difference and the economic recovery if you were to increase just one level of English. So let us bring our panel in and have this conversation. I'd like to start a question with two, both, I could ask both Quincy and Chris. Could you tell me what this looks like in your workforce, right? Do you have any employees that aren't able to leverage their background because of the English barriers?
You want to start off?
Start, Quincy? You can start, Quincy.
Okay. Happy to start off. So thanks for the question. And first and foremost, on behalf of Eastern, we're proud to have partnered with English for New Bostonians for years. And so we understand how critically important the work is that Claudia and the entire team is doing in support of many of the things, quite frankly, that Alvaro spoke about here just a little bit ago. And I guess how I'd answer that question, and one example, one other shout out is one of our commercial banking colleagues, one of our senior commercial banking colleagues, Yomei Chen, is actually a board member. And this is a great example of how we think about it. And some of the things that I've come to learn from my time is I think employers often, sometimes they think about the work that's being done as sort of entry-level jobs. But the reality is what I've learned is, yes, it's both entry-level jobs, but I've also learned that the language barrier creates a significant underemployment for immigrants who come to this country with really good skills. And then they get, pigeonholes into roles that are really not up to their skill and ability. And so, here at Eastern, I know, for example, Yomei has worked together with English New Bostonians and hired people to work in commercial banking roles together directly with her. And so we obviously look for ways, and colleagues, and in many ways see having, being bilingual in jobs here at Eastern as very critical to our overall success. And if someone is, underskilled, look for, programs like this to be able to help them to continue to develop and progress in their career here.
Yeah, and I also echo the sentiments of Quincy. Thank you so much for having us on this panel. We love being able to partner with such an amazing organization. And to follow up on what Quincy was saying as well, I completely agree with him in the sense that a lot of our hourly workers, as Alvaro put it, aren't quite proficient in that English, but there are multiple examples even within our company over the past 3 or 4 years where language has been the seminal barrier to being able to access those kind of higher level jobs. I have two really awesome concrete examples of that. One of our hourly workers, she was an immigrant, and she came and she started off as an hourly worker on our lettuce packaging facility. And she did have proficiency in English. So she was able to advocate for herself, and she did have a lot of professional and administrative experience from her job in her past country. And so she was able to advocate for herself. She communicated with our team, and now she is working in a full-time HR position at Little League Farms. So that's just an example of somebody who can leverage their skills using the language. However, we found out that there are many of our employees who don't have that access and can't leverage those skills that they have. So we, as a company, actually, we brought in English lessons through English for Business, and people would come, we'd have a teacher come to our facility pre-COVID, and they would come to our facility and they would have an hour lesson every Tuesday and Thursday at the end of the first shift, the beginning of our second shift. It was fully paid by the company. And what we found was that many of our employees took advantage of this opportunity, and one in particular, she graduated at the top of her class, and she was originally an hourly line worker. And after getting that proficiency in English that she needed to leverage those skills, she actually communicated with us and applied within our company to become a managerial role. So she used those classes in that English, and she basically is now our head seeder in our new greenhouse. So she has a much more expanded role. She uses the language classes, and she's still setting up like one-on-one classes with our teacher even during the pandemic. So it just shows what Quincy was saying, that so many of these immigrants that are working for us are really underemployed. They have so many skills that they can't leverage just due to simply the fact that they can't communicate with the team that they have these skills. And once we brought on those English lessons, that's when we really found that out.
Thank you both, Chris and Quincy. That's very helpful seeing the impact of our work. Secretary Acosta, from your side, what additional trends are you seeing as far as job shifts and job creation, especially when it comes to the immigrant workforce?
This is such a rich conversation, and I'm so happy to be here. And as Claudia said, I'm a huge fan. A huge fan because I've seen the success of English for New Bostonian, but I'm also a huge fan because this is very, very personal for me. And as an immigrant myself, watching my parents, I came to this country over 50 years ago, and we're still talking about the same thing. We're still talking about English proficiency for immigrants. Not a lot has changed in that conversation, and we can't keep doing what we've been doing and expecting different results, right? Someone said that. And my parents both came here. They were both educated professors teaching at the University of Havana in Cuba. But when they came here, because they spoke zero English, they needed to basically start wherever they could and work in factories, etc., until they both learned English and both went back and got their master's degrees because their PhDs didn't mean anything here, and they went back to school. But it took them 12 years. And if you think about the economic opportunity, and they weren't teenagers when they came here. They were well into their mid to late 30s. So think about dropping out of the workforce, for 12 years, so you can learn English, take care of your kids, etc. So that had a pretty tremendous economic impact on the family. And my parents never owned their own home. And I know housing is a big problem that we haven't spoken about yet, but I'm sure we will. I lived in the first house. My very first house was when I purchased, because I worked for Eastern Bank and they were nice to me. And back in when I was almost 30 years old, I bought my first house. That was the first house I had ever lived in. So I say that just to emphasize that this story just continues. We just continue to hit on this over and over again. And it is a very personal journey for me. When we look at what's happened, and Alvaro, I'm not going to, I always enjoy your presentation so much, and I'm not going to repeat the statistics that Alvaro gave you. But when I look at it from a claimant perspective, and I look at who has been hit so hard in this unemployment this past year, you see women at the top of that chart. Right? Women have now dropped out of the workforce in an extraordinary way. It worries me as a woman coming into my career in the 80s and working so hard to get to where we've gotten to. The issues of childcare, the issues of homeschooling, those were, those issues of childcare have always been with us, but it was considered a woman's problem. It is a worker's issue, not a woman's problem. And when I look at the demographics and I see that 20% of my claimant pool is 20% is Latinos, and about 16% are Black claimants. We're in a different place coming out of this pandemic than we were in the recession of 2008. And as Alvaro had said, some of the places that got hit really, really hard were those low wage jobs, right? So leisure and hospitality, accommodation and food services, a disproportionate percentage of our members, our communities of color, got hit in those sectors. And construction, very different than last recession, right? Construction will emerge, it didn't get hit as hard in this recession. And that tends to be more white male dominated. So you can see the whole skew in the industry. We also, one of the sad statistics I can say here too is that with all the federal programs that were being paid out and are still being paid out, there was an extra $300, and back in the summer, it was an extra $600 that if you were on unemployment, you were paid an extra benefit. What I would say is that when it was at $600, 80% of the claimants were making more on unemployment than they were working. Now that it's gone down to $300, 60% of folks are making more on unemployment than they are working. What does that tell me? It tells me that we've got an incredible love affair with low-wage work here in Massachusetts. And there are some jobs that absolutely need to be low wage. Let's face it, there are just entry-level jobs and they're minimum wage. But I guess the question is, what are we doing with that low wage work in terms of improving the quality of that job? And what are things that we can do as policymakers and employers to improve the quality of those jobs so that we make it our responsibility to make sure that people are getting the tools necessary to move up or out of that particular job. And English is at the heart of that. Because if you're looking at a claimant pool that is 20% Latino, and some of them, not all of them, speak English, but not all of them speak English. What are we doing to help them? What is our social responsibility to help them move to a better position? Alvaro spoke a lot about credentials and spoke about, if you just move one degree, how does that affect income? I would also submit that it's not just credentialing, it's also about skill-based certifications. And we are working very hard to make sure that our programming includes licensing and in trades, in manufacturing, in IT. And these areas are always significantly wider and less diverse than other industries. The industries that got hit the most are the industries that are the most diverse, have the most communities of color. The industries that got hurt the least are the ones that are predominantly white. So that tells us something too. So there is absolutely a structural inequity in our economy. And I look at a pandemic as a really great way to look at, look, we've tossed everything up this year, everything. And this is a really good time to rethink the way that we're looking at our policies and the way that we're treating our employees. And I can go on like for 5 hours about this, but I know we only have a little time, so I don't want to hog up all the panelists' time. But happy to continue chatting about this.
Well, I'd like to stay with you for a second, Secretary Costa, and then I'll pose the same question to Quincy. You're talking about sort of we need to rethink, and we know, as you've just pointed out, the inequitable way in which the pandemic has affected Black and Brown communities, and I think that's been even more so for our immigrant communities. But what does, posing your own question, what does an equitable economic recovery look like?
Yeah. So thank you, Michelle. I'm very, very bullish on apprenticeship programs, and I think we underuse apprenticeship programs, and the trades have done a great job with apprenticeship programs over the past decades, right? Apprenticeship programs are very, very old. If anyone has seen Fantasia, right? Mickey Mouse and the Apprentice, that was the original Apprentice. So in all seriousness, apprenticeships, our main goals are two for apprenticeship programs. One is diversify the folks that are going through apprenticeship programs, be it trades or other programs. And two is diversify the industries where we're thinking about apprenticeship programs, which has been a little bit of a slower uptake, I think, for employers, because not everyone can imagine how an apprenticeship would work in their shop, and that's where we're here to help you do that. We stood up, Quincy, our first apprenticeship program in banking with Reading Cooperative Bank a couple of years ago in retail. Now we're moving to form training programs in the lending side, because we know that the wages are better, right, on the lending side than they are on the retail side. But that could be a good way to retain and acquire new employees. So I think apprenticeship programs are also important because people are getting paid while they're getting trained. And one of the issues with our communities is if you're working two jobs and then you're coming home at 9 p.m. and you want to have at least a glimpse of your children, when do you have time to train? And number one, you have time to train, and number two, can you even afford it? So again, I think this is a community endeavor where if we're really honest and about folks moving up and getting trained, we're going to have to do it on the job. And we can help with that also with grants, workforce training fund grants, et cetera. But that's something that I think we as a community need to think about. How are we training workers and not putting it on them to do it outside of work hours?
Excellent. And so, what I would say, just a couple of things. First and foremost, it begins with equitable distribution of vaccines. And getting to making sure that it's not only in terms of vaccine distribution, but also the critically important aspect of education. So we have to address the health aspect of this pandemic first. And then I think, that another opportunity is ensuring, like vaccine distribution, that our communities of color have this, have equal opportunity to the resources and programs that are out there to be able to help individuals and businesses through. And I'll just use one example, which many of you have heard a lot about, which is the payroll protection program for small businesses. And as we look through the first wave of payroll protection program, small businesses, particularly small businesses of color, were those that were left behind on a program that was designed to help strengthen and help keep businesses afloat during the most difficult times, right? And the challenge there, we're talking a lot about the language barrier as an example, and I'm proud to have been able to spend time on numerous calls with Alberto Calvo, who I know is on the call here today, and his group of Hispanic American Institute coming together, bringing together Latino and Latinx businesses, really particularly challenged with the language aspect of how to work through the PPP program, and then getting business bankers like Jorge Andre from our team, who was able to join all of those calls and be able to really make a difference. So, now that we're in round two of that PPP program, and we're at the point where the vaccines are coming, businesses, need this additional shot in the arm to help keep them and get them through these winter months and through the vaccine rollout. Making sure that our businesses of color who are employing people of color in our communities is really critical, and that they understand the free money that's really available through this program, and that we make sure that we're, again, from an education perspective, talking about how to maximize this so that it's not a loan, but it's a grant, and to be able to keep those businesses afloat, be able to keep their employees employed, and be able to help keep food on the table. Those are all critical examples of what we need to do as we come out of this pandemic.
That's very, very helpful insight, Quincy. Chris, on your side, so how does English fit into like sort of the training and the current business survival and then recovery as a result?
Yeah, definitely. So I think to start with the business survival and recovery, you got to start with and Alvaro has talked about it and Quincy talked about it as well, and as well as Secretary Acosta, is the shift of jobs. Because at Little League Farms, to be honest, automation and the automation of jobs has been something that we've been really aggressive about. Our greenhouse is a fully automated greenhouse. Everything is harvested with machines. And what that does is that kind of takes away some of those minimum wage, low skill jobs that Secretary Acosta was talking about, and it kind of moves those to a higher level, more skilled job pool. We don't need people to harvest the lettuce, but we do need people to fix the machines when that harvest lettuce when they break. So as Alvaro's data suggests, a lot of those kind of lower skilled jobs are predominantly employed by immigrants. And so at Little Leaf Farms, as we automate, we want to grow our employees as well as while we automate those jobs. So we want to help employ the immigrant workforce, but they're going to need to be able to leverage those skills and not get pigeonholed into some of those low skill jobs that oftentimes immigrants do get put into. A prime example, I like using anecdotal examples from our time at Little Leaf. So another example is we had another hourly line worker that came from another country who was actually an extremely skilled mechanical engineer. And we didn't know that. And so as soon as we started automating some of the skills, he would hop in and be like, oh, I can fix this, I can fix this. And then we realized that it's another example of just an underemployed person on the line who can help in much bigger ways than he originally was. So I think as businesses transfer a lot of their jobs to automation, that's going to leave behind a lot of immigrants just because they can't leverage those skills that they have. And so if we don't help promote that population and we don't help train and really teach those immigrants English and helping them grow with companies they're automating, they're going to be left behind. And so at Little Leaf Farms, we are really trying to encourage all of our employees to take these English classes that we're offering and help them grow with us. And I think when you do that, your employees also realize that we are investing in them and we're investing in their success with the company. So it also helps grow a culture at Little Leaf Farms. And so it's really working with the council, it really is only benefits. I mean, investing in your people, investing in your employees, helping them grow with you, especially with English, especially with language acquisition, has been an awesome experience for us. And I think it is a necessary step with the way businesses are moving forward and recovering and surviving with the move to automation.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, very much for that, Chris. I'm conscious of the time, so what I will do is I will remind the audience that if you like to ask questions, please put them in the chat group, and Evelyn will help us, who's our Director of Development. She'll help us gather the questions together. We may not get to all of them today, but we'll have them on our website and we'll answer them off-site. So on that vein, before I go, I have one final question for Secretary Acosta, if you could close us out. You mentioned the workforce training program. What other programs exist out there, Secretary Acosta, that might be helpful for companies and companies that employ immigrants, especially those with limited resources?
Thank you, Michelle. Well, the first thing I would say is the best source of information and resources on anything to do with workforce is your local Mass Hire Career Center board. Through them, you could really learn, because I don't expect you guys to know. I mean, government was a new thing for me 4 years ago, and I've learned a ton, but it was a real mystery when I was on the outside because there are so many different resources. And if you really want to know where the resources are, Mass Hire can help you with that. We have 29 career centers throughout Massachusetts. So the Workforce Training Fund is definitely one great way, and we do provide grants for English learning, and this is money that all employers are paying into. You pay into that every time you pay quarterly taxes on your UI. A piece of that is going to the Workforce Training Fund. It's your money that I'm giving back to you. So please make sure that you apply for the Workforce Training Fund grants. We distribute about $21 to $23 million a year in workforce training grants. So that's one you can take advantage of. Another grant program is a Workforce Competitiveness Trust Fund. They all sound very similar. That's why I want you all to go to Mass Hire. And that program is very much sector-based. So we take a sector-based approach to that. So whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in healthcare, we do a lot with healthcare with the WCTF grants, personal care assistants, direct care assistants, CNAs. A lot of is matched up with that grant. And then we have a new program that I'm very excited about that gets to that credentialing that I was talking about, called the Career Technical Initiative. And that we started last year with a small line item of $4 million. The governor has now put it in this budget for fiscal year 22 at $15.5 million. And the idea behind this grant is to work with employers to identify what are the needs that they might have. And it's particularly around the healthcare, manufacturing, IT space, and the trades. And what we do is we put adults through training at night in vocational schools. So we use that voc school for 3 shifts. The first shift is for the kids that go to that voc school. The second shift is for kids that are in regional high schools that perhaps did not get into that voc school, or have decided that now they want some voc classes. And then the third shift will be held from like 5 to 9, 5 to 8, depending on the vocational school, for adult training in different sectors. But our goal is to always have an employer on the other side of that, so that folks aren't training for training's sake. There's a lot of money that goes into training. There are millions and millions of dollars that go into training in Massachusetts, throughout the country, but they're no good if there's not someone on the other side waiting to hire you. So we also have allocated $10 million in CARES Act money just for workforce. And that's going to be, again, another sector-based approach, not just with vocational schools, but with community colleges and with training providers to match basically the jobs that are available and make sure that we train to the skills needed for that job and have that employer at the other end ready to hire that person. And that is a wide range of industry that we're looking at. That we're not limiting that. So those are just a few of the programs. But again, your Mass Hire Centers are the best place for information.
Thank you very much, Secretary Acosta. Very much appreciate that. Now I'd like to turn it to Evelyn. If Evelyn, is there a question from the audience? Hopefully we can ask this distinguished panel.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. We do have a question from Miss Evelyn Barahona. She is from the Boston Foundation, and she would like to know, from a policy perspective, what needs to happen to prioritize English language skills for workforce, and who should be the stakeholders to push this forward in terms of access and investment.
Is that question for me?
Yes. Well, I'll open it.
I think bankers are real important because you got money too. So look, from a policy perspective, I think there's been a reckoning here from this pandemic. I mean, I think us, a lot of people had this reckoning well before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has definitely created a reckoning for a lot of employers as well as policymakers. It really has created this rift, and the rift that we have right now with the claimant pool that we have is not going to be easy to re-employ. We're going to need a lot of what we call wraparound services to get the low-wage workers into another job, and that's credentialing. That's going to be English. That's going to be adult basic education. So fortunately, I work very closely with Secretary Pizer from Education and Secretary Keneally from Economic Development, and we form what the governor formed about 4 years ago called the Workforce Skills Cabinet. And these are the issues that we look at as policymakers to make sure that we're aligning our goals, we're aligning our dollars, and that we're making sense of the economy and the data that we're getting to make sure that the policies that we're promoting to the governor are ones that are going to move the needle. But I think this is going to take a bit of a village. None of this, and I am from the private sector, I'm not from the public sector, and what's become acutely clear to me is that none of the answers I give you can be done from the government side only. This has got to be work that we do with employers, with foundations, Evelyn, and you guys are very involved with the Boston Foundation with so many initiatives. But this is going to have to be a real community effort in order for us to move the needle here.
And just, I would just, I was joking about it being a banker and answering this question, but, to Secretary Acosta's point, and to the point, the data that Alvaro shared with us, as an employer, particularly bilingual skills in the Commonwealth are critically important. I mean, we have jobs, we launched an innovative virtual, we call it virtual banker. Instead of being in the branch, you can literally, go to an ATM and talk with a banker. We saw an amazing uptick from Spanish speaking customers who used that channel, because what they liked was this wasn't intentional. It was just, we're just working on filling the slots. We had many Spanish speaking virtual bankers. And so they like to be able to interact in their native language versus maybe going to the teller in the same branch who didn't speak Spanish. And so, that became a job that we don't hire for anymore unless they are bilingual, specifically that they can speak Spanish. So you see that shifting demographics in our Commonwealth is also shifting the business models on how we need to execute and be able to serve the community.
Let's see if I can just tell a story. I think I became a banker when I was about 5 years old. And it was because of what you just said. My dad, I grew up in New Jersey, and we were going to, his bank was Hudson United Bank in New Jersey. And I would go to the bank with my dad, and there were usually 3-4 tellers. 3 of them had very few people. One of them had a line out the door. And my dad always stood at the one with the line out the door. And I was like, Dad, what are you doing? Why? I mean, impatient 5-year-old. And he's like, because Maria knows how to take care of us. And Maria, speaks Spanish, right? And none of the others did. So I think that's what, it wasn't an aha moment there. It was an aha moment much later in life.
Yeah, and to piggyback on what Secretary Acosta said as well, like from a commitment from the private sector is needed. And I would say our experience with investing in English classes has been a win-win all around, because it just promotes the culture within the company. It promotes the workers that know that we're investing in them. And then, as well as Quincy said, I mean, the woman that we promoted to be HR is bilingual, so she can communicate with both the team and the workers, and is like a instrumental part of our organization now. So from a private sector experience, we've only had positives from investing in English classes for our workers.
Well, that's fantastic. I want to be conscious of everyone's time, and I want to very much thank from the bottom of our heart our very distinguished panel, Mr. Lima, Secretary Acosta, Mr. Miller, Mr. Salou. Thank you so much for your insight and for a very dynamic conversation. As you said, Secretary Acosta, one thing is clear is we can't do this alone. We need everyone on board. So, and as you've seen here, the tools, the models, the knowledge is here. So, what we're hoping to do at English for New Bostonian is continuing creating this conversation and learning how we can create more equitable pathways for immigrants to join and advance within your company and within the recovering economy. Again, I want to thank our funding members, C&W Services, Stop and Compare Supermarkets, and Eastern Bank for leading this charge and joining us today as well. Special thank you for the ENB board and staff member who are really the people putting this together. Thank you all for all that you do and for all the very hard work that you do in helping our communities move forward. We weren't able to get to all the questions. They will all be